On July 11, 1989, the National Resistance Army, NRA, in Uganda rounded up 300 men in Mukura, a small town in northeastern Uganda. They were suspected to be rebels against the NRA regime. A group of 120 of these men were placed in a holding cell, which happened to be a small train wagon. 4 hours later, 69 of them had suffocated to death. So what exactly happened? I came across this story at the Uganda Railways Museum in Jinja. Our tour guide briefly highlighted it, but I got curious and decided to do some research on it. I found a detailed report filed in March of 2011 by the Justice and Reconciliation Project. This, together with written accounts from newspapers as well as other sources, will form the basis of our understanding. Uganda's political scene in the 1980s was turbulent. A guerrilla war was being fought on several fronts. In 1986, Yoweri Museveni's NRA seized power through a successful coup against General Tito Okello Lutwa, the sitting president at the time. As Kampala fell, supporters of Lutwa's Uganda People's Congress, the UPC, fled north. It was easier for them to gather support and spread propaganda in their hometowns. You see, in some African countries, if not most, political affiliation is usually tied to your tribe. Uganda is not any different. Most of the soldiers serving in the NRA hailed from ethnic tribes of Western Uganda. Some were of Rwandese origin, while UPC was mainly composed of people from the north and the northeastern part of Uganda. For these reasons, the NRA knew to quell rebellion they had to make their way to the Teso region of Uganda. Now, this brings us to the days preceding the massacre. It is said the soldiers arrived 3 days prior and went about arresting civilians at random. People who might not have been sympathizers or supporters of the rebels were rounded up. NRA soldiers had difficulties differentiating who was innocent and who was not. Also, there was a language barrier. The Rwandese soldiers spoke Swahili, and as they went about questioning residents to reveal where the rebels were hiding, the answer they got was Mama Ajeni, meaning I don't know in Ateso. But in Swahili, this means Ajeni's mom. So this led to the soldiers concluding that there was a lady named Mama Ajeni who was the commander of the rebels. As they arrested and questioned the rebel collaborators from different parts of the region, they sent them to Okungulo railway station. Here, they were kept in the goods shed with no food or water and an intense fear of what was going to happen next. They were kept here not knowing if they would ever be released. They were exhausted from the fatigue and the heat of the sun. Suddenly, the soldiers came and asked who wanted to drink water. Given the situation, 120 men from the goods shed responded. They were then asked to come out of the goods shed and follow the soldiers to where they would be given water. Instead, they were herded into train wagon number C52108. The soldiers guarded each side of the queue such that no one would escape. The people were then squeezed into the train wagon until it was full to capacity. After that, the door behind them was shut. Under the heat of the sun and in a small metallic container, they struggled to breathe in the hot, stale air. One of the survivors describes the scene as follows. Less than 30 minutes after the entrance to the wagon was shut, the people inside started shouting and crying and banging on the walls of the train wagon. It was hot, there was not enough fresh air, so people sweated and cried out. One man lost his mind and started punching and kicking everyone near him. Due to the heat and lack of oxygen, we started crying and yelling. The little air in the wagon was like hot oxygen. All the people inside the train wagon were confused and frightened. Many people started crying out aloud. Others decided to sing their funeral dirges. Others prayed to God to help them. The soldiers opened the door when they heard the people shouting. Then they asked us, "Why are you crying? Show us the rebels." We thought we would be released if we confessed. So we all said, "We think all of us are rebels," but the soldiers just locked the door for the last time. After a few minutes, some people started falling down. Some fell and started kicking around, as though fighting something unseen. And that was the end of it. Other people drank their own urine. Some were lucky to be next to a hole and they put their noses there for fresh air. They had to cling to these positions because if they fell down, that would be it. There was no getting up. People falling down may have created space for those who survived. But then, every time those standing tried to move, they would end up stepping on those who had collapsed. The floor was also covered with urine, feces, and vomit. So you can imagine the situation in that wagon, which was sitting under the hot, scorching sun. Sometime in the late afternoon, they felt a cool breeze fill up the wagon. The door was finally opened after 5 torturous hours in that metallic container. Most of them were too weak to walk. They had to crawl on their fours. They were headed back to the goods shed, and then the soldiers hastily buried the dead. Witnesses believe that some of those men were still alive. Had they been given first aid, they would probably have survived. On 12th July, the next day after the tragedy, the captives were released. They were very weak and had to rest several times before they got home. The story of what happened in Mukura spread like wildfire. Those with relatives who had been arrested came looking for them, only to be denied entry by the soldiers. The general outcry from the families prompted Kumi district authorities to exhume the bodies and bury them in another location within Okungulo railway station. A few months later, President Yoweri Museveni visited Mukura. He addressed the crowd in full military fatigues, apologizing for what happened. He then promised a decent burial for the dead, plus compensation for the families of those who had died. He promised he would construct a secondary school in memory of the victims and accountability for the soldiers who perpetrated the massacre. Did that ever happen? Well, shortly after the president's visit, the bodies were exhumed again to be buried for a second time in a mass grave constructed by the government. Construction of the secondary school was started and the project was finished. The army also set up a military commission of inquiry in the nearby town known as Mbale. This was to establish the facts of the massacre. However, these proceedings or findings of the commission have never been made public. None of the army officers who took part in the massacre were held accountable. As for the compensation, only partial payments were made. In May of 1994, 750,000 Ugandan shillings was paid to the families of each person who had died, and this was half the amount that was promised. The survivors of the massacre, 47 of them, also claimed that they had been promised compensation by the president, which was never delivered. According to a 2022 report, the victims are still waiting for the balance of the promised compensation.